Now let's build the seat for our little aircraft. So we want to have a seat, and I'm thinking that this pod is basically going to be kind of for one person. So we want to have one seat, but we want it sort of extended where you're almost kind of standing, so kind of a pad here in the back. So one of the ways we can do this is just, again, to start with a primitive. So let's this time start with a primitive cube. So we'll just drop it into our scene. And you remember, we're going to go ahead and change these values in our attributes manager. So let's go ahead and change the number of segments. Let's go ahead and give it a few segments in the Y, and we can go ahead and extend it out. Okay, make it a little bit longer. Let's give it a few more segments here. And let's go ahead and just give it a couple of segments in the Z. We can go ahead and pull out in this direction. Okay, let's make it a little bit thinner at this point. Okay, so something like that. We can go ahead and rotate it to get it kind of roughly into position, and also move it down a little bit. All right, so we can get something like that. Okay, so once we're ready to start doing some shaping, we can go ahead and make this editable. So again, it's a cube. We'll go to make editable. Now we can edit this as a polygon object. So we'll go to the side view, and let's go ahead and move back. And here's our object. Let's go ahead and use our point mode with our rectangle selection. Make sure that you have only select visible elements turned off. And now we can come in and start shaping this. So let's go ahead and rotate this top section. So these two polygons, and we'll kind of move this down and in. Okay. Now let's take these next polygons here, and we'll kind of move those down, and let's also sort of rotate them a little bit. We'll make sort of three kind of main sections here. Okay, kind of make that nice and straight. And then here we can go ahead and pull these down and in. Let's go ahead and rotate this a little bit in one axis. All right. So we end up with something like this. So now what we want to do is start to think about creating the pads for this. Now I want to shape this on the bottom first just a little bit. So let me go ahead and take these points down here, and I'm going to change this axis to a world axis so I can now pull it down along its axis here. So bring this down a little bit. Let's go ahead and select these and bring those down a bit. So basically we've got, think of this as three sections, and I want to make the padding or the upholstery for this. So I'm going to go ahead and use live selection, and I'm going to go to polygon mode, and let's actually select this whole section, and let's just extrude it out a little bit. So I'm going to kind of pull it out a bit. I'm going to turn off or turn the subdivisions to 0. I do want to also shape this top part a little as well, so let me do that also. So just selecting those, and this time I'm just going to use a world axis. Okay, let's go ahead now and again extrude out another section. So live selection, select those polygons, extrude them up. Oops. Extrude them up a little. Let's do the same thing down here. We'll extrude this whole section up a bit. Now I want to start to separate this out a little. So I'm going to go ahead and extrude this section up just a bit. Let's do the same thing on both of these sides. On the sides, I'm going to extrude them out a little bit further. All right. And then down here, I'm going to go ahead and just extrude these pads out. And in this case, let's actually treat these as separate. So anytime we've extruded up to this point, we've sort of treated all the polygons as being the same as far as they're still connected. So if we do an extrude now, and we turn off preserve groups and pull those up, they're actually, if we look at this, grab the points here, they're actually separated. So those polygons have been extruded separate. Let's go ahead and do the bottom. And this time let's turn that option back on. So preserve groups, and we'll go ahead and extrude this out a little. Okay. I also want to have sort of a little rim that's coming out. And so I want to select all these polygons coming around the rim of this all the way around. So one of the ways that we can select that loop of polygons really quickly is just go to loop selection or hitting UL, and then I can click on this edge and it'll click that entire loop all the way around. Then we can go ahead and do an extrude, and I can just pull that out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the visibility for some of these other pieces. So we're just left with this now. And I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of the polygons on the back because we don't need those. So if you have polygons that are really going to be hidden, you're never going to see them, you can think about just getting rid of those. Now we are going to have those points to get rid of, so let's go ahead and optimize. Try that again. There we go. So now we have this really sort of boxy shape. And we want it to be sort of an upholstered, smooth shape for our seat. So we need to smooth it. So to do that in Cinema 4D is really, really easy. And working with this hierarchy type workflow, it's really easy to do. So what we want to do is go here to these generators. And we've got this HyperNurbs object. So you can see it's got a little cage and then a smooth sphere underneath. This is what we want to use. And this is using a subdivision algorithm, Catmull-Clark. And it's going to smooth it out. So what we want to do is drop the cube that we want to smooth, and let's go ahead and rename this to seat. And let's go ahead and drop it under the HyperNurbs. Now we'll go to model mode, and you can see that it's actually smoothing everything out. So this is the actual shape that we created. Now you can see that there are certain areas where we might want to sharpen things up. So to do that, we would select our seat. And we can go ahead and select, let's say, knife tool with loop mode, and we can come up here. And let's go ahead and drop in a line, and you can see how that kind of sharpens things up a little bit. Oops. Go ahead and drop that in. There we go. Kind of sharpens things up. We could do the same thing down here. Okay, and also, oops, at this point, kind of creating those pads. We can come around here, do the same thing. Kind of sharpen that up. You can see we got off a little bit there because these are, or should be separate. So we'll deal with those. But we can start to add geometry in here. So in looking at these points, you can tell it didn't quite do what we wanted it to do here. You can see it separated them out, but our points are still merged together. So what we can do is actually use something in the knife tool that we haven't used up to this point to kind of correct this. So if you ever want to cut out sort of a seam, what we can do is go ahead and select the knife. And let's go ahead and choose to create a line. And I'm going to turn off single. Okay, so we can actually draw across several. Now, up to this point, we've used it to create loops. At this point, we're actually going to tell it exactly where we want our lines. So we're going to go ahead and come in here. We'll start at this point. You can see as we hover over the points, it gives us a little indicator here. So I'm going to start right here, and then we're going to come to this edge and click. And then we're going to come down here and click on this edge. And then we're going to start back at that point. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing over here on this side. Hit the space bar to just go back to our last tool. Come up here and do the same thing. Click on the edge and click on the point. All right, now let's go ahead and click on these particular polygons. So we'll click on that quad and that triangle. Okay, and let's go ahead and delete those. All right, let's go ahead and click on these. And this last one here. Let's go ahead and delete those. Okay, so we have one face there, so we just need to fill in that opening. So what we can do is actually use something called close polygon hole. Go in here, click on that hole, click on that hole. You can see as we hover over it, it's smart enough to realize that that's a hole, and now we've got those all separated out. Okay, so even if you hadn't gone ahead and extruded that, you could still do the same thing here. So now you can see we get separate bits here, and we can come in with our knife, set that back to loop mode, and come in and add some resolution in here. Okay, maybe do the same thing down here. Now if this is a little bit too sort of flat, you can come in here and shape it a little bit on the seat part. If you want to come in and either pull it up or maybe even push it down a little bit, and come in here and maybe add a little bit more shape to it, maybe bulge it out a little, add a little bit more, make it look a little bit more like it's been used. Okay, but that's the kind of the main idea, getting our sort of nice kind of high-tech upholstered looking sort of a seat. If you want to sharpen up this division here on the side, again, you can use your knife to do that. With loop mode, we'll just go ahead and add a loop right in here. I'll turn that off temporarily. Go ahead and add a loop in there, and then again you can turn back on the effect of your hypernerbs to see the result. Let's turn everything else back on, except the canopy. And if you need to, you can manipulate the size and the scale, or even push and pull points on our seat. Okay, if it's maybe a little bit too big, you can kind of scale it down a little bit and just put it in more of a position that you want. Maybe set it back in there a little bit more and give us a little bit more room to work. All right. So now that we've got our seat created just by using some quick polygons and hypernerbs, let's take a look at kind of a detour and just take a look at some of the sculpting abilities that we have here in Cinema 4D and how that will actually work. We won't go too in depth on that, but just give you a little taste of the sculpting workflow that you have here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that next.